The Hill of Howth tram commenced service on June the 17th, 1901. These trams set off from Sutton Station and travelled in an anti-clockwise direction via the summit until they arrived at Howth Station. Most of the passengers that travelled on the trams boarded them at Sutton Station, transferring from the Howth Railway branch line. Beyond Sutton Cross, the trams continued on the right-hand side or seaward side. They then entered the Bailey Reserve and crossed over the viaduct at Stella Maris. Howth Summit was the halfway point, and the trams usually rested here until the final descent into Howth Station. Originally the trams were painted crimson lake and ivory, but on account of the shortage of pigments during the First World War, they were turned out in a striking livery of varnished grained mahogany. And during the early 30s, the livery of the 8 brush trams were changed to the familiar blue and cream of the Great Northern Railway. No matter how harsh the weather conditions, the trams kept running even when every other form of public transport had long since come to a halt. Blue and cream cars were built by Brush Electrical of Loughborough, whereas numbers 9 and 10 were built by Millans of Birkenhead, and these 2 trams retained their grained mahogany livery to the closure. These cars were larger than numbers 1 to 8 and were considered very gracious indeed. They were designed by the Great Northern Works in Dundalk. This is number 10, descending McLuh's Bank. Passing over the viaduct, over the main road to Howth Station. It was impressive to see both of these cars in service together. Although expected for some time, tragically, this scenic and well-loved tramway came to an end in 1959, and thousands of Dubliners came to Howth to bid them a fond farewell. Over the years, the parts of the electric tramway system have been gradually vanishing. But the trams themselves, what happened to these? Number 1, tram crew Tom Redmond and Willie O'Brien. This was the first tram to be scrapped after the closure. Mrs. Redmond told me that she wept bitterly to see Tom's tram broken up into little pieces. In the 30s, number 1 came off the rails at speed and was halfway down Sensor Road before she could be stopped. The story of number 2 was more fortunate. After closure, she was taken by the Orange Trolley Museum in Paris, California. She was re-gauged to suit the American wheel spacing of 4 foot 8.5 inches. Number 2 is now undergoing a full restoration program and will become the prima donna of the big railway extravaganza to be held in Paris later this year. The restoration team leader was Jim Fulton. The crew were Dick McClue and Des Farrell, and occasionally Tom Redmond. Although the Trams retained the same fateful crews year after year, when necessary, one crew member would either conduct or drive another car. Number 3 was the most fondly remembered and perhaps the best loved of all the Trams. Each year she was decorated with tinsel and holly and winking fairy lights for Christmas. It was magnificent to see her late at night with carol singers on her upper deck. She almost survived and was taken to the Guinness's brewery to await a new home. As she bore the Guinness colours of blue and cream, there was hope that she might be saved, but it was not to be. She was finally scrapped in 1965. Her crew were Bob O'Connor and Billy Rankin. Number 4 was the first tram to open the service on the 17th of June in 1901. Originally, the tram terminated at Stella Maris until the remainder of the track work was completed some months later. Her crew was Tom Whelan and Colin Weaver. After closure, number 4 was taken by the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum in Witham Street, Belfast, where she was fully restored. It is now located in Cooldraw. Number 5 was known as the Unlucky Tram and never seemed to be out of trouble. She went on fire and was struck by lightning and knocked down the gatekeeper's wife at the summit in 1912. In 1930 she killed a drunkard who had fallen asleep across the tracks outside the sheds in the darkness. The motorman was exonerated from all blame. In true form, she was the first tram to be withdrawn in 1957 from severe body rot. Her crew was Billy McNally and Pat O'Dowd. The bogies and control gear of tramcar number 6 was taken by a transport museum in Manchester and placed under a Californian type single-deck tram number 765 that once ran in that city. The heart of number 6 runs again and is part of a major tourist attraction at Heaton Park in Manchester. Her crew was Bob Martin and conductor John Montague. Number 7 was also scrapped directly after closure. She was affectionately known as the tram with the square wheels. She was used for the training of the motormen, and incorrect use of the braking system caused her to slide and wear the wheel flanges and cause the clanking. She seemed to have the unhappy habit of skidding and swaying more than any of the other trams. Her crew was Peter Shields and Jimmy Conlon. Number 8 was the most photographic in the early years. Most of the old postcards appeared to depict number 8 in her crimson lake and ivory livery. She is the only tram for which I have not found any movie film, but maybe some will still turn up. Her crew was Pat Hanway and Jack Graham. Number 9 was perhaps the most famous of all the trams. She was chosen to be officially the last tram to run in Ireland and closed the line in 1959. Her crew on that fateful night was motorman Christy Hanway and conductor Alfie Riley. With number 3 and the works car number 11, she was sent to Guinness's brewery and set aside for preservation. Of these 3 cars, only number 9 survived and was taken by the National Transport Museum and brought to their premises in Castle Rotherry, County Wicklow. Sadly, she almost perished and was badly damaged by vandals, souvenir hunters, and the elements. Number 10 was the most fortunate of all the trams. She was the least used and always seemed to be taking it easy. After the closure, she was taken by the Tramway Museum at Christ in Derbyshire. When she arrived, she was in such good condition that she was described as 1902 tram in 1904 condition. Christy Hanway filled her with useful tram components for her new home. She was placed under immediate cover, awaiting her turn for restoration. The Howth tram team visited her in 1982 when she was kept at Clay Cross, a railway shed some miles away, under the watchful eye of Roger Benton. Her full restoration began in 1984 when she was brought to Bolton to undergo full repair and regauging. She was used in Blackpool in 1985 in that town's celebrations of Britain's first electric tram. The Giant's Causeway tram in our museum, now undergoing a full restoration, opened the line in 1883 and is believed to be the world's first full electric tramway system and can be seen at the National Transport Museum. She has since joined the magnificent tram fleet at the Society's premises in Christ, Derbyshire, near Matlock. Our restoration team continue to visit her at Christ, which is considered the world's tramway mecca for tram lovers. We made a full structural and dimensional survey of number 10 and took a record of the missing components for the restoration of the Howth tram number 9, her sister. Her usual crew was Jack Maypotter and Michael McGlue. Number 11 was the most unusual of the tram fleet and was built by the Great Northern Railway in their Dundalk works as their works car to attend to the overhead cables. She was also set aside for preservation to Guinness's brewery, but with number 3 was scrapped in 1965 in spite of desperate efforts to save them. Number 11 was used in June 1959 after the closure to help to dismantle the old tramway system, and as such was the last non-passenger tram to run in Ireland until the advent of Lewis. Her crew was Christy Hanway and Patrick Kelly. Let's return now to tramcar number 2. I mentioned that she had been taken by the Orange Trolley Museum at Paris in California directly after the closure. She was immediately converted to the 4-foot 8.5 gauge and then effectively abandoned. Motorman Tom Redmond and later the chairman of our museum, Liam Kelly, visited Paris to see her, and when they saw that nothing had been done, they shook their heads and sadly walked away. When my first book, Howth and Her Trams, described what had happened to the various trams after closure, it sadly but truly related that number 2 was left to decay slowly in the Californian sunshine, and that no one seemed to care. That was until Jim Fulton came along. Jim read the book, and my comments prompted him to take action. He picked up the phone, rang me and said that their museum staff should rightly be ashamed, but all of this would now change. Jim promised that the work would start forthwith, and he sent me a long query list for information and details required. We in Howth were delighted to oblige. Jim phoned me several times, urgently seeking information, and in the summer of 1987 came to Howth to visit our museum and also see number 9. He also went to the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, which was at Witham Street at the time, to see Brush electric car number 4, which was identical to number 2, and with the information gathered, returned to Paris. The following year, as part of our Dublin Millennium celebrations, the phrase "Dublin is great" in 88, number 2, though still unglazed and only in undercoats, ran officially at their museum and carried both the tricolour and the flag for the United States. Some Irish dignitaries were invited to the launch of number 2, and she was put through her paces. This film was made by Jim Fulton shortly before number 2's second maiden voyage. It gives a good idea of the many and varied American streetcars now sharing the august company of number 2 from Howth. Jim informed me that number 2 is extremely popular, not only because she is Irish, but the design is so different or quaint, as Jim put it, but most popular of all was the fact that she was their oldest tram and their only double-decker. She was also open-topped, and this would appeal greatly in the sunny Californian climate. This is Big Jim Fulton picking up and waving a small tricolour in recognition of her birthright. Jim is 6'4" and almost dwarfs the tram. In the autumn the following year, in 1989, Kevin Carlton, who was a member of my tram restoration team, visited Paris. Unfortunately, number 2 was in the shed, or the barn as Jim called them, and the running line was blocked, so a trip around the museum complex was not possible. This did not deter Kevin. He asked that the tram trundle in and out of the barn again and again and again. He promised me some running film of number 2, and he was determined to get it. In spite of the short, repetitive journeys, it was lovely to see number 2 in action again after so many years of silence. Whilst it is sad that she is not climbing our beloved Hill of Howth, but running on the scorched Californian plains, she is well cared for in her new home, and we all owe a debt of gratitude to the staff of Paris, especially Big Jim Fulton. He made a promise, and he kept it. John Holland, Jack Graham, Stephen Hanway, Pat Hanway, John Tidyman, Paddy Cosgrave, Paddy Kelly, Matty Knowles, Patrick Campbell, Nicky Carlton. That was Gavin's grandfather. Jim Bertie, Isaac Bailey, Charlie Parks, Bob McConkey, Frank Flood, Jack Phillips, John O'Brien, George Lestrange, George McConkey, Tom Cosgrave, Dan Kelly. Bob O'Connor, Billy Rankin, Billy Hayes, John O'Mara, Jack McAllister, Peter Cummins, Billy Best, Bob Cosgrave and Jack Whelan. Christy Brown, Mick Bellew, Willie O'Brien, Oliver Finnegan, Joe Sinnott, Joe McGlue, Michael Fitzpatrick and Paddy Cosgrave. Christy Hanway, Tom Redmond, Tom Whelan, Dick McGlue, Michael McGlue, Des Farrell, Norman Steele, Michael Fitzpatrick, Peter Shields, Colin Weaver, Billy McNally, Bob Martin, John Montague, Jimmy Conlon, Alfie Riley, Jack Maypotter, Ollie Moore, Norman Steele, Christy Grant, Fred Millard, Colin Weaver, Billy McNally, N. Hoffman. Peter Shields was the last surviving motorman. Pat O'Dowd, last surviving conductor in December 2023. Christy Hanway was the official last motorman on number 9 on the night of closure. Tom Redmond was the last motorman to drive out of Howth Station on number 2. Dick McGlue was the last motorman to enter the depot on the night of the closure on number 6. If I've left somebody out, please forgive me. Contact me, give me your name, and I will make sure your name is added. Jim Kilroy, Director of Tram Restoration, National Transport Museum.